And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Wednesday morning, looking something like this. IFR along the coast of the Panhandle and inland there, certain ways there over the northern part of the southeast coast. Otherwise, marginal VFR, North Gulf Coast, Yakutat, Prince William Sound into Turnagain Arm and the Alaska Peninsula, as well as along the Alaska Range here. And then IFR, Fognak, Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, Alaska Peninsula. Good VFR in the interior all the way up until you reach the Arctic coast, and then you get some lower conditions there with IFR through the Bering Strait into much of the Bering Sea, right up to the southwest coast here, covering Nunivak Island, down into Togiak Bay, and then into the at least the north shores of the west central Aleutians. For the afternoon, pretty much solid IFR here out over the western Bering Sea, west of Adak, and Pribilofs, marginal VFR to IFR with good IFR right up into the Bering Strait there, and the Chukchi Sea, Arctic Ocean. So marginal VFR here along the west coast, especially the Seward Peninsula, and improving here over the southwest part of the state, Togiak, Kuskokwim Bay. IFR lingering along the western Alaska Range there, mainly on the eastern slopes. Good VFR over the interior into the Copper River Basin, and some IFR here east side of Kodiak, Fognak Island, and again along the south shore of the Alaska Peninsula with IFR, marginal VFR, IFR gone here along the Gulf of Alaska. Just some marginal VFR right along the coast there, the Panhandle. VFR inside waters. See the interior looking really good for tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon. And for Thursday morning, IFR back up along the south and east coast of the Kenai Peninsula into the Barren Islands there, and Kamishak Bay as well as the east side of Kodiak Island. And marginal VFR on the increase again, Cook Inlet and into the, possibly Sitna Valley up to the Alaska Range, and maybe into the southwestern Copper River Basin, possibly the Manuska Valley. And pretty good conditions, though, continue in the interior here, especially the north slope with marginal VFR possible along the Arctic coast in areas. Solid IFR out here over the Bering Sea for the afternoon. That doesn't change much. Lots of IFR in the forecast here for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians west of Nikolsky. IFR up nudging up to Nunivak Island, covering the Pribilofs, north through the Bering Strait, and mostly remaining off the Arctic coast, otherwise just marginal VFR there. North slope down into the interior, all the way down the Kuskokwim Valley, lower Yukon Valley. Good VFR, Copper River Basin, call it VFR there. IFR up into Prince William Sound, maybe Resurrection Bay, and southward, marginal VFR Kodiak Island, north into the Susitna Valley, and looking pretty good. Looking really good for the southeast coast. VFR here, even into the eastern Gulf of Alaska. Passes for Wednesday. Adigan, VFR, Anatuvik, same forecast, looking good for the Brooks Range on either approach. Lake Clark and Merrill. Marginal VFR, lowest conditions, eastern entrance, both passes. Same thing for rainy, possible marginal VFR, especially on this eastern approach. Better out to the west, VFR there to the west. And for windy, VFR. Isabel, VFR. Mentasta, VFR. Tanita, VFR. Portage, marginal VFR. Lowest conditions early on, improving in the afternoon, possibly becoming VFR during the afternoon hours. Otherwise, Chilkoot and White looking good for the next couple of days. VFR flying for both passes there. And the freezing levels, 10,000 feet here covering the southeast coast. And roughly in the morning, about 6,000 feet or so here across much of interior Alaska, out to the Bering Sea there. And then the real warm air way out here to the west, 12 to 14,000 feet. And for icing, areas of isolated moderate rime icing possible here in the shaded areas, eastern Bering Sea into the southwest interior with all that moisture to the west. That cuts off. No icing expected central eastern interior of the Panhandle. Could be some considerable moderate rime icing maybe here around Kodiak Island there and maybe up along the northwest coast. Jet stream, upper level ridge here over the northeast Pacific and actually ridging northward here across the eastern interior. So south flow up to 115 knots, diminishing to about 75 knots there in Bristol Bay. Southwest 90 knots, western Arctic coast. sharp trough right through here across the east central Bering. So good northerly winds on the backside of that trough, 90 to 100 knots right across the central Aleutians. And 9,000 feet, southerlies 50 to 55 knots here over the western interior, strongest over the Alaska Peninsula and to the south, from south to north here. And then northerlies up to 45 knots over the Aleutians. Much lighter winds here, eastern interior and the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, about the same pattern, south to north flow, pulling the moisture northward here. Drier conditions under the lighter wind flow in the ridge axis right through here, and developing almost an offshore flow there over the Panhandle. Taking a look at turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence possible here. Western Alaska Range, the Aleutian Range, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, Southern Cook Inlet, as well as Adak and Atka. Pretty smooth for the Panhandle and much of the northern interior.